Hello and welcome to the final event here today at the U.S. Center, a progress report on industrial decarbonization, how First Movers Coalition couples with policy to clean up industry. It's our honor to introduce to the stage Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Energy, David Turk.
Thanks very much for the introduction. If we could start off, since this is the last day of the event, I've done a number of events here at the U.S. Center. Our U.S. Center staff is just doing such a terrific job, so professional, so organized. If we could just give them a real round of applause. All right, thank you guys. All right, let me just set the scene a little bit. We've got a phenomenal panel, and I'm eager as you are, or maybe even more eager to learn from them. So I'm going to try to keep these remarks brief. But let me just try to set the scene a little bit. First of all, I want to just test the proposition of why we're all here in this room. For those who maybe are involved heavily in the First Movers Coalition, including folks who are literally helping to run it and organize it in some of the leading companies that we'll hear on our panel, but also others who are here to learn about the First Movers Coalition. And I just want to put my bottom line up front. I think it's one of the most important things that we're doing. I think there's such huge potential. We've only scratched the surface on what we can do all working together, public and private, supply and demand. But I think there's three things that all bring us here into this room. First of all, I'm confident you're at the COP, but you're in this room in particular, and I think we all have a passion and a vision and a real interest in doing our part to get us to a net zero economy by 2050. It's useful to take a step back. 2050 is not that far off. We've got to decarbonize, including in the hard-to-decarbonize sectors. A lot of industrial decarb work is so-called hard or harder to decarbonize, but we all share that passion to do what we can to get things done. We also recognize that if we're going to get to net zero, it's not just in electricity, where we are making some progress, but it's in transportation, it's in buildings, and it is in industry. And we're all overachievers, so we've got to make progress in all of these sectors, and we've got to make real, tangible progress in the industrial sector, including steel and cement production. There's no alternatives to taking it all on and taking it all on directly. And third, this may be the most important part. I think we're all committed, and again, testing the proposition. If there's someone who wants to leave who's not agreeing with all of these things that I'm saying, you're more than welcome to do so, but we're all committed about doing something about it, right? It's not enough to talk about it. It's not enough to do modeling about it. It's not enough to do corporate plans about it. How are we executing? How are we implementing? How are we actually going to get this done in the real world? And I'd add to, how do we think about our puzzle piece fitting this all together to make it work? I think that's where the First Movers Coalition is such a powerful piece of that puzzle. So whether you're representing a government, and I'm fortunate enough to be representing the U.S. government at a really historic time where we're trying to step up and do what we can with these historic pieces of legislation, or you're in the private sector, we all have a part of the equation. Maybe there's a fourth reason. It's actually nice and cool in here, and it's really hot outside, so maybe some people are in here for the air conditioning, but hopefully you agree with the other 3 points that I just raised. The industrial sector, I'm glad it's getting more attention. It needs to get even more attention. Just a few nuggets of why we need to pay attention. Concrete and steel production account for nearly 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions. There's no way we get to net zero unless we take this sector on in particular. And production of both of these, both concrete and steel, is expected to rise nearly 50% to 2050. So if it's a problem for emissions now, it's going to be an even bigger problem in the future. We need to get a handle on this. We need to make concrete steps as quickly as we possibly can. This is going to be, if we're going to be successful in the industrial sector, certainly in a open market economy like the U.S., we say that this is going to have to be private sector led, but there's an important role for government. There's a role to incent, encourage, enable this as well. But it is going to have to be a private sector that does things at scale, that has the solutions, that make market sense, again, with incenting, encouraging all the things that the government can bring to the table. I feel incredibly proud to be part of this administration at this particular moment in time where we have a lot of the tools in our tool belt, a lot more tools than we had in the tool belt previously. We've got tax credits. We've got tax credits, just if you want to look at hydrogen, a hydrogen production tax credit we're in the midst of finalizing our rules for, up to $3 per kilogram. That's a big incentive. We've got $7 billion that we're spending for hydrogen hubs across our country. We've got $100 billion just in our Department of Energy for grant programs. That's an awful lot. When we talk about some of these sectors, we've got procurement ability. State and federal procurement drives 50% in one way or another of cement consumption in our country. Using the federal Buy Clean initiative, that's an incredibly important tool in our tool belt to make progress going forward. We've got analysis. We've been doing these liftoff reports at the Department of Energy, trying to work with industry. We've done a terrific one on hydrogen. We've done a terrific one on a variety of industrial technologies, both generally but drilling down as well. We've done one on virtual power plants. So we can bring that expertise to bear, working with the public and private to plan. But we need to figure out not just the supply side, we really need to figure out the demand side piece to it. And again, I think this is where corporate leadership, the First Movers Coalition, works in particular. We've got to focus on the R&D piece. We've got to focus on the deployment piece. But I want to focus just for a minute on how important that demand signal piece is. If we have all of this supply but we don't have the demand, we're going to have a market that's not going to work. People are going to get frustrated. People are going to be disillusioned. People are going to question why we're spending federal resources, taxpayer resources to do these kinds of things. As I said at the outset, I think the First Movers Coalition is one of the most exciting things out there because it's capturing those leading companies. It's putting that into commitments. It's making those market signals to show that if you're going to produce clean concrete, if you're going to produce clean steel, there's a market for it, and there's an interest for that and a matchmaking to make sure that that happens again in the real world. My biggest hope with the First Movers Coalition is, especially with industrial decarbonization for concrete, for steel, is that we take that harder to decarbonize and hard to decarbonize name that's been attached to these sectors, and we show humanity they were hard. This is not going to be easy. But if we're successful in some of these sectors, it's not just that 15% of global emissions and growing. I think it's a phenomenal example when we make tangible progress on the supply, on the demand piece, that we can take these things head on. And when we're successful in one sector, I think it increases the confidence level, it increases the political support, it increases corporate boardroom buy-in to then lean into a different sector. So there's a lot of responsibility on all our shoulders. All right, hopefully that's some good scene setting for you all. That didn't take too long, I don't think. And now we've got a just phenomenal panel for everyone to learn from. Thanks, everybody.
And now, Senior Advisor to the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, Annie Hills.
Thank you. I'll start by saying I am not the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. I am the Senior Advisor to the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, but I will take the promotion. So I'm happy to announce my new role. Deputy Secretary, thank you so much for those opening remarks. I had actually planned to give a little bit of an overview of the FMC, and I still will, but I will do it very quickly because I think you really laid out the case for what we're doing here so spectacularly. I am thrilled to introduce our panelists. These are both members of the First Movers Coalition, but also companies who have made real, tangible progress towards the commitments that they've made, and that's what we're going to hear them talk about today. So if I could please call up to the stage, we have Roger Martella, the Chief Sustainability Officer of GE. We have Martin Pei, the Chief Technology Officer of SSAB. We have Michelle Patron, the Senior Director of Sustainability Policy at Microsoft, and we have Vikram Ayer, the Head of Climate Policy at Heirloom. So guys, before we get into this conversation, I'm going to make you indulge me for a second to explain to everybody in the room what we're talking about when we talk about this First Movers Coalition. Deputy Secretary Turk laid this out really well, but when we talk about the First Movers Coalition, we're talking about companies who have recognized that we need to supercharge the pace at which we are decarbonizing the hardest to abate sectors, and who recognize that there are actually solutions that exist today for these sectors. And we talk about steel and cement and aluminum. We talk about shipping and trucking and aviation, and also carbon dioxide removal, which will be a part of that solution. Those solutions exist today, but they aren't at scale and they're expensive. And so we need, as Deputy Secretary mentioned, folks to say, I'll buy this at the other end in order for this market to scale up. And that's what we have now. We have actually 95 companies in the First Movers Coalition. So even more than these 4 who are on stage today, although you are all very important. And that's $15 billion of commitments that have been made for 2030. What I'll also say is this is 94 offtake agreements have already been signed. So I think folks come to the COP and think, I'm hearing a lot about commitments that are being made, but am I just, are these companies just saying this? Is this greenwashing? And what we're really thrilled to discuss today is that our members are actually pushing forward on making real progress and showing that these commitments, while difficult and while sometimes expensive, are real. I do want to flash up quickly. These are our wonderful 95 members who we have. Again, we're talking about a couple case studies today, but we have across all 7 sectors a wonderful set of corporations who have made really, really ambitious commitments that a high portion of their value chain will be these clean materials. This is just, again, a little visual overview. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but all of these logos on the stage, on the screen, these represent companies who are starting to move towards real tangible progress, and it's really exciting to see and to dive into a bit more today. So without further ado, let's get to the good part and hear about what's actually happening on the ground. Roger, I want to start with you, and we have a very, very exciting announcement together, which is that GE Vernova just joined the FMC as a new member. So first of all, Roger, thank you so much, and congratulations to GE Vernova for making this really ambitious and difficult commitment. We'd love to hear from you why you guys made this commitment, and this is a steel purchasing commitment, and what are you doing already as you think about this commitment to actually meet what you've set out to do?
Well, Annie, thank you very much. And first, congratulations to you for your leadership. So we are proud to announce today our commitment, but I want to share something that you probably don't know is we've been talking about this for 2 years. I wouldn't be surprised if we were one of the first or the first company Annie called a few years ago around COP26, and we said, this sounds really great. But when we looked at it, it just, as much as we wanted to do it, just couldn't fit for us. And we didn't want to do something that wasn't credible from our standpoint. We didn't want to do something that diminished the credibility of the first move. So we had, every 6 months we'd check in and we'd see how things would evolve. And so we're so proud to be here today. And it's not because of us, it's because of you. It's because of how strategically you've evolved this and grown it with these great partners here. So now we can come in and be part of it in a sincere way that carries durability and impact. And we wanted to make sure we were in that position as opposed to just signing up for something where we get the logo and didn't make a difference. So that's a really credit to your leadership. But in terms of GE, so we're an innovation and technology company that helps produce 1/3 of the world's energy through our equipment. And so I'm here at COP28, pretty busy like a lot of people, and everybody wants to talk about the electrons we're putting on the grid, how we can lower the carbon intensity of the electrons we put on the grid. And that's super important. Electrification, decarbonization, that is why we're here. But we've come to appreciate it's not just about the intensity of the electrons we're putting on the grid. That's very, very important. But we also have to be sensitive of the carbon intensity of the equipment we're innovating that puts those electrons on the grid. And that's why we're here as part of the First Movers Coalition. We have an obligation to product stewardship, to circularity, to make sure it's not just about the way our equipment works, it's the way we build it, the way we use it. And we think a lot about the 3 Rs, recycle, reuse, repurpose. And we have a 4th R, which is rethink. And it's not just enough to recycle and reuse. We have to rethink from the beginning how we're designing our products from the ground up, if they're really going to be circular, if they're going to be sustainable. And that's where the First Movers Coalition fits for us. It's part of that rethinking from the beginning, the full life cycle of our product and the way we design things before we even put them on paper. We were very honored that the COP28 presidency gave us a space in the Blue Zone to demonstrate something of our technology. I think we may be the only company with that opportunity. So about 5 minutes from here, we chose to use wind as our showcase, how to use this gathering space. And right at the beginning of our exhibit, about 5 minutes, is our recyclable blade, the zebra blade. And that's a big part of what we'll be doing with the First Movers Coalition. So we're a pretty big company, 1/3 of the world's energy, 80,000 employees working on this, but we know we can't do it alone. We would not be able to do this commitment for, let me get this right, it's near zero emissions steel, because I do have a request, which is we never use the NZ again for anything but net zero, and I was sure I was going to get that wrong. It's near zero emissions steel, so we've made a commitment for that. And I'm proud to say that we already see that trajectory with our partners. We're the first company to qualify in the wind industry to build near zero emission wind turbines that's qualified in the U.S. So that's just a really big part of the First Movers Coalition with Secretary, as you said. As big as we are, we need the demand signals, we need the market signals, we need the buying power, and it's only because of the work you've done the last 2 years we feel we have that momentum now to be part of this with our partners so that we can succeed. So thanks for all your leadership to get us here.
Thank you so much, Roger. Martin, we strategically set up the way that you all are sitting because Roger spoke a bit about the need for partnership. And we know that GE has these wind turbines that are made that include steel. You produce green steel at SSAB. SSAB is both a first mover who has made a demand commitment, but you're also a supplier of FMC material, green steel. So I'd love if you could tell us a little bit more about some of the projects and the partnerships that you all are taking on in order to help not only meet your own FMC commitment, but help other folks meet their green steel FMC commitment.
Thank you very much. Great honor to be here. SSAB is a steel company with headquarters in Stockholm, Sweden, but we are as much as a U.S. steel company. We have 2 steel mills, one in Iowa, one in Alabama, where we run electric furnace-based steel mills producing high-quality steel, heavy plate products based on recycled scrap. And in Sweden and Finland, we run blast furnace-based process making steel from iron ore. And that is where the majority of our steel industry Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions comes from. The reduction process today is dominated by the blast furnace technology using coking coal, reducing iron ore, then produce high-quality steel. So back in 2016, we teamed up with our partners, Vattenfall, which is also FC member, and LKB, the mining company, and we decided to develop the hydrogen-based direct reduction technology. We have been running a very exciting pilot plant since 2020, and in 2021 we produced the world's first fossil-free steel, which we delivered the first products to another FMC partner, that's Volvo Group, who showed very exciting vehicles, and some of those products that Volvo have made based on our small trial deliveries are now being used in the U.S. market. Then we have delivered products to a number of our strategic customers, several U.S. customers, in addition to Volvo. And now we are really very, very proud to team up with Roger and GE Vernova, that we are really delivering our first SCP Zero products based on recycled scrap with no added fossil emissions in its production process, using biocarbon, replacing fossil carbon, using biogas, replacing natural gas in our current production technology. And that is really a great opportunity for us to build up the market and really create these strong partnerships. So our Scope 1, Scope 2 emission we can remove becomes your Scope 3 emission. So with that, we really create the value chain that can fully decarbonize.
Martin, thank you so much, and congratulations again on the massive breakthroughs that you had at SSAB. And I do want to call out that you mentioned this is hydrogen-based clean steel, and we'll come back to that a little bit, how the hydrogen ecosystem and hydrogen policy plays into some of your business case. Michelle, probably everyone here in the room actually recognizes you because Microsoft is everywhere at this COP with so many exciting announcements. But one of the exciting announcements was that Microsoft, who has made a carbon dioxide removal commitment, you all announced that you've actually exceeded that commitment. You have now contracted to exceed that commitment. I think you're one of, if not the first movers coalition members to do this. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Thank you, Annie. And I want to just start by thanking the Department of State and the Department of Energy for their leadership and recognizing the important role that both innovation and the private sector play in deep decarbonization. So 18 months ago, Microsoft joined the State Department and the World Economic Forum and other leading companies to launch the initiative of the First Movers Coalition around carbon dioxide removal, really around durable carbon dioxide removal. And we're proud that 18 months later, we're able to say that Microsoft has met its commitment to contract for $200 million of durable and scalable carbon removal by 2030. And let me take a step back and talk a little bit about carbon removal and the important role that it plays. Because carbon removal is sucking carbon from the air, removing it, and then storing it for very long periods of time. There are lots of different carbon removals that are out there, and they all play an important role, but increasingly we're going to need the very durable solutions that are stored for hundreds, frankly, 1,000 years in order to help the world get to net zero. Carbon reduction first strategies are critical. We need to take as much carbon and reduce it as much as possible, but alongside carbon reduction, we need carbon removal. That's why, as part of Microsoft's climate strategy, we have a goal of being carbon negative by 2030 to get our own operations and our electricity to as near zero as possible, get our supply chain down by at least 50%, and to keep going by removing. And we have a separate removal goal to remove all of the historic emissions that we put into the atmosphere by 2050. So in 2020, when we set this goal, there was no carbon removal market. There was no commercial carbon dioxide removal projects. Frankly, Microsoft had to issue a request for proposals in order to find carbon removal projects. And since there was no organized market, we actually had to go about and set our own criteria of what meant additionality. So what it meant to actually show that if Microsoft was not involved in this project, it wouldn't happen. What were the type of criteria to show that it was durable, that it could be verified and last for permanently for hundreds of years, and that it could provide equity. And so as we went about this process, and we've been showing our work through papers every single year as we demonstrate which projects we're choosing, we realized very quickly that it was going to take more than Microsoft to scale this market. And so we're very, very excited to bring and to work with the First Movers Coalition to help bring others in. And now, 18 months later, we've announced that we've fulfilled this. And really, as you heard from Roger and Martin, it takes teamwork. And it's not just Microsoft. We are supported by our incredible partners in this, and we're able to make this commitment because of the several offtake contracts, including ones that we have with Heirloom and Vikram's company in the United States, that we have with Ørsted in Denmark, that we have with Climeworks in Iceland, and among others.
Congratulations again, and Michelle, thank you for laying out really the case for partnership and how important it is. Like I said, we strategically seated folks here. So Vikram, Heirloom, as we just heard, recently signed a large long-term purchasing contract with Microsoft, and you are actually not a member of the First Movers Coalition because you all are on the supply side. You're providing that CDR. So I would love to hear, why are these sort of demand commitments and then also moving into long-term offtake agreements, why is that so important to scaling up the market?
Well, one of the macro reasons that they are important is that without them, we really have no path to 1.5. It is both that simple and that complex. Heirloom Carbon, if you're not familiar, is a carbon removal company, but we use this pretty unique process that uses a very earth-abundant material, limestone. It's pretty unsexy stuff. It's in chalk. You can get it pretty much everywhere, and 4% of the earth is covered in it. To go back to high school chemistry class, if you remove one molecule of carbon from limestone, it wants to rebalance itself. So it gets really thirsty and just starts sponging a shit ton of CO2 from the atmosphere around it. So what Heirloom's process does is kickstart this process that removes a molecule of carbon from limestone, puts it on very large stacks of trays, kind of like a cookie baking tray that you would bake cookies at home. And then when we passively expose it to the air, it starts absorbing lots and lots of carbon dioxide. We just unveiled our first commercial facility in California to both permanently remove, store, and then sell those carbon removal credits. And I think to answer Annie's question, we heard from Deputy Secretary Turk earlier that the United States government has done extraordinary stuff in this space with passing the Inflation Reduction Act, infrastructure law money allocation. All of that has actually helped investors come to Heirloom and say, let us help you build and grow. But unless we have demand-side contracts, unless we're able to ink partnerships with Microsoft and other private buyers, there's no necessarily catalytic flywheel in this entire ecosystem. We need government policy to set targets. We need the advocacy and the excitement of tax codes like 45Q to draw investors to the table to provide us with venture funding as well as project financing. And then we actually need bankable agreements, partnerships with Microsoft, partnerships with other companies that are in the funnel on the horizon that actually show us that there is a carbon market of demand and sale. Without that, we don't actually meet the removal side of the IPCC science, and we think it's pretty sweet to both be able to facilitate demand side policy by way of legislation and partnerships to be able to move that forward by way of celebration of how to do that in the real world.
Thank you so much, Vikram. You know, it's funny. Sometimes we hear about CDR and it sounds so high tech. What does it even mean? And all of these innovations. And then you realize it's a bunch of stones on baking trays, pads, stacked up. Not to diminish, obviously. It's much more complicated than that. But Vikram, you brought up the great point of bringing in the conversation about the role of policy. And we are here in the U.S. Center, and we heard from Deputy Secretary Turk about, a lot of the U.S. policy that we have set forward to try and turbocharge innovation in the U.S. and globally. So I want to sort of take the conversation a little bit to what the role of policy has been. So, Roger, for you, maybe we'll just start by saying, how has U.S. policy impacted the way that you all are thinking about green steel and other industrial goods?
I can't help but think, reflecting on where we were last year, COP26, and here we are, COP27, the biggest game changer has been policy and partnership, frankly. Secretary Turk said part of my favorite saying, he didn't complete it. It comes from DOE, they get the credit. What Secretary Turk said, that the energy transition is private sector led, but what DOE normally says is, but enabled by the government. And what I like about that full quote, which I give them full credit for, because it is the quote I use the most, whether I'm briefing my board or talking to other people, is it reflects this era of partnership that's really been the fundamental game changer in going from an era of talk to an era of action. And if you look at the progress, even for a company like us in 12 months since we were at COP26, how much we've done on the IRA. We've built factories, we've hired people, we're building things in the U.S. we were never building here before, and we wouldn't be building but for the Inflation Reduction Act. I just point out one example, this high-tech exhibit over here, where Secretary Kerry, Ambassador Thorne was very gracious to lend us some space. This is a collaboration of 10 large U.S. industrial companies focused on the innovation and technology space. We felt so strongly about the partnership led by the U.S. government. We approached Secretary Kerry and his team, and they enabled us to create this exhibit highlighting the role of U.S. innovation. But there's a policy button, and when you push it, it shares reports from NGOs like C2ES and Energy Innovation. It says, here's all the policies that are working for companies in the U.S., and here's what other countries can take away from it to work. So that just reinforces 10 companies here feeling so strongly about it, the partnership for us to share this space. And I just have to, before I end, take a moment to echo Secretary Turk's comments about the staff, because we've had the privilege of working with the staff here in preparing this together, and I can't say enough about the extraordinary partnership, their extraordinary dedication. My own CEO was here a few days ago, and he took notice as well. That's all I'm going to say. But he had some comments for me about the things your staff is doing right, that some lessons for me. So it's a great example of partnership and how policy, we're not just talking about it, it's actually having the impact and accelerating these actions.
Thank you so much, Roger. Martin, I want to recognize first, SSAB is actually a Swedish company, but I'm going to ask you a little bit about the policy in the U.S., which is, how has the industrial policy in the U.S. not just necessarily changed the way that you might be thinking about the business of green steel and hydrogen in the U.S., but the outlook for the market globally?
the whole engagement by the U.S. government, the First Mover Coalition, and also all these incentives to invest in new technology really create the market. I mean, our customers are really moving ahead with their investment programs in this complete transformation of the whole industry. That gave us the opportunity to develop our business because we are operating in the U.S., in Sweden, Finland, but our customers are around the globe. So the whole, push for the overall energy transition and the climate change mitigation focus is really, really very, very helpful.
Fantastic. Michelle, sort of the same question to you about the role of policy, how it was helpful for you all as you were approaching your carbon dioxide removal target, but also some of your broader climate goals. I know Microsoft is also involved in procuring green steel and thinking more broadly about how to decarbonize your Scope 3.
Yeah, so our theory of change is when you couple corporate procurement with investment, an early stage investment, and policy, that's when you really scale markets. We've seen that happen dramatically in the renewable energy space. 15 years ago, you had all of these corporates that came forward, made these targets and commitments, and then building on the policies that were out there, were able to really take renewable energy beyond what any of the forecasts were saying. We're beginning to see this in the sustainable aviation fuel space. We've seen this in the carbon dioxide removal space. This is the same kind of muscle we're hoping to bring to the green steel and to other hard-to-abate sectors. And, when you think of the policy landscape, it's both demonstrating when you're part of these projects, you're able to go to governments and you could say, look, if we can change this policy, look at what we're able to unlock. At the same time, you're also able to go and say, I've been in this first-of-a-kind project. Here's what went well. Here's what we need to do to scale it and help inform how better policy or more effective policy can be made. I would say in the carbon dioxide removal space, there's kind of been three important levers for policy. One has been to help cultivate demand. So Deputy Secretary Turk talked about some of the tax credits, the 45Q tax credit, as Vikram mentioned, was really critical, especially the update and the modernization to it in the recent set of legislation. Took it from just a carbon capture and utilization storage credit to a full carbon dioxide removal credit, including direct air capture, and brought it up to a level of funding that made it much more attractive for companies to come off the sidelines. The second is helping to scale supply. And doing that, there's a lot of different ways, but one important lever is through support to first-of-a-kind projects like what the DOE hubs, and both in DAC and in other energy sources are looking to do. And the third is in standards and in helping to better build integrity in these markets and consistency in the goods. There's lots of different ways to get there. One of the first ways that the Department of Energy went about this is 2 years ago at Glasgow, they issued Carbon Shot. And they kind of set criteria of what projects could qualify. And that is kind of an implicit way of at least showing what are the criteria for these projects, so then developers can build to those projects, and then companies feel more comfortable securing offtake from those projects.
Really, really well put, Michelle. We could write that down and have that just be the strategy for everyone. I think that gets us perfectly to you, Vikram, and to Heirloom. Like Michelle mentioned, you guys are actually a recipient or part of the DOE DAC Hub program. Would be great if you could maybe explain for everybody what that means, and then a little bit of maybe a reflection on how that policy has helped you guys to scale and what you hope to continue to see.
Yeah, so the Direct Air Capture Hub program is about $3.5 billion allocated under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And Heirloom was part of a consortium of other companies that applied for some of that money and was selected or was notified for a selection that we might potentially win up to $600 billion worth of that funding. That is a game changer for a company like ours. just all flags on the table. We are still in negotiations with the DOE as to whether that will come across the finish line, but we're quite hopeful because it means that for the California-based facility that I mentioned a few moments ago, we can now scale this technology. We are a 3-year-old startup. We're a Series A venture-backed company that was just PhD research in 2020. We have our first commercial facility in 2023, and now because of this infrastructure law funding, we're able to scale, if all goes to plan, that technology from the West Coast to the Gulf Coast with a promise to potentially build this in Louisiana. Now, that is a big deal when it comes to just catalyzing this space in general. But I think what it also demonstrates is that this is the infrastructure law, this is the IRA, this is the United States government's policy development at work. And it's helping small Silicon Valley companies like us start building again. And I think for as long as America has been concerned about whether it's building or not, after eras of shipping software, we are now able to ship hardware. And that is a big deal. But I think to Annie's earlier point, policy is so inextricably linked that I hate to sound greedy, but truth be told, we need more of it. Many of us hear about problems that maybe TikTok or Meta or Google or YouTube have with their products in the marketplace and the desire for laws to have to catch up to those products as they exist. Here, we actually need Uncle Sam and other countries around the globe, from the EU to the Middle East to Canada, to be able to play early stage angel investor and sprinkle a little bit of financial upside into different types of technologies that are in the reductions and the removal space. And if we don't have more policy intervention in that way, individual agreements with Microsoft and individual allocations from Congress and the administration alone will not get us to the gigaton scale of carbon removals we need. We need to see the government get in the business of direct procurement of removals. We need to see the government get into the business of compliance-based legislation that forces heavy emitters to pay their fair share when it comes to removal. So I do think that policy design is going to continue to be important. Industry has a promise and an obligation to show that it actually can de-risk the technology, put it out there, partner with the private sector like GE, like Microsoft, like others. But we're going to then need to take that back to governments, both at home in the US and abroad, to say, hey, if you're serious about meeting these global goals, we're going to need to partner with you with the next phase of getting us from where we are today to where we want to go tomorrow.
Thank you, Vikram. And you know, when I hear those stats about how quickly you guys got from that sort of PhD idea to your first of a kind project and the potential timeline for scaling it, it seems almost crazy to hear, but you realize that's exactly the kind of pace that we're going to need if we're going to meet the climate crisis. So we've got a couple minutes left before we introduce U.S. Assistant to the President and National Climate Advisor Ali Zaidi for some closing remarks. In fairness, I want to give Roger, Martin, and Michelle maybe just the opportunity to say a couple of seconds about what more you'd want to see in U.S. policy, or what more you'd want to see to really help push forward industry in this decade.
Great. Sure. I mean, I think it has to do with more of the same. I think that we've talked about a number of different areas. We have different markets or different technologies and sectors that are at different stages of this. I think as we get to more of the hard-to-abate sectors, there's a lot of that's still in the lab that has to go from the lab to the market. And so I think that there's additional support that needs to be made there, and partnership with the private sector and universities when it comes to research and development and deployment. I think that there's also, when it comes to then getting that from the lab to the market and the first of a kind, the kind of learning from the playbook of direct air capture and hydrogen and doing the same types of things to be able to scale. And then when it comes to creating consistency around integrity and standards.
What I would propose is the First Movers Coalition has a lot of momentum. We need more First Mover Coalition type initiatives, because what has happened with Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act is you've solved for the demand. The demand is not an issue. There's more demand than supply right now. And the first movers, so what we're running into are ecosystem issues. Do we have the net zero, near zero emission steel? Do we have the right components from the hard-to-abate sectors? First Movers is solving for that. It's working. We're in early days, but it's clearly working. But we have other ecosystem issues we need to solve for: permitting, labor and workforce, supply chain. beyond the First Movers Coalition, I would love to see this as a template and as a model. What you've been able to do in 18 months, 2 years with all these companies and bringing everyone together is probably the biggest success story beyond the IRA, beyond the Infrastructure Act. We weren't able to do it 2 years ago. Now we are, thanks to our partners. So I think this is something we can duplicate and replicate. Others can learn from for these other big challenges we need to solve.
Yes, I really like your comments here. I think we as an industry are now ready. We have developed the technology. Fossil free steel is working using green hydrogen. And now we want to push the investment program as fast as possible. Our limiting factor, not in the US, but in Sweden and Finland, is really the governmental process. That is slowing down our timeline. So if the First Mover Coalition could help also to incentivize some of this governmental process to become quicker, I think then we will be all winners.
That's fantastic. Well, I want to say thank you again to each of our panelists. This was such a thoughtful way of laying out both the learnings from your progress and also helping us all to understand what are these different pieces that are pushing us forward and where they need to push a little bit further. So thank you for your time and thank you for your commitment to keeping 1.5 alive and keeping us where we need to be in terms of climate action. Can we have a round of applause for our panelists?
And with closing remarks, Assistant to the President and National Climate Advisor, Ali Zaidi.
It's a big picture. Very grateful to be here with all of you and with leaders who've really stepped up in a big way to answer Secretary Kerry's call to be first movers that help us forge new frontiers, de-risk the deployment of critical technologies. And I think the central piece of the thesis on the First Movers Coalition is not the first moving part, but what follows. Pulling along as much of the industry as quickly as possible to advance the solutions we need so desperately. For the longest time, we've looked at the industrial sector as too hard to abate, too difficult to take on. I remember the United States showing up to COP21 with our NDC at the time. And in our wildest dreams, our most ambitious articulation of what was possible by the middle of the century, there was still a slice of the economy we said we wouldn't be able to reach by 2050. Thanks to the relentlessness of entrepreneurs and innovators, that is now within reach. And thanks to President Biden's historic legislation in the United States, we are going to put real road miles against those technologies, not in the 2030s, not in the 2040s, but in this decade and right now. In my office, I have a piece of steel that was forged without putting any carbon pollution into the sky. That's no longer something that happens in a laboratory. It's something that can happen in our factories, and it's an opportunity for reindustrialization. As I think about the trajectory we followed just since the President signed the Inflation Reduction Act, we've seen 100 factories be announced, and in so many cases, that is taking place in communities that had seen factories over the last several decades be shuttered, be shut down. Technologies like green hydrogen, our ability to run electricity through water and separate out a molecule that can be the source of fuel to forge steel and cement and aluminum and flat glass cleanly, sustainably, is now available, not in the distance. As a government, as the federal government, we are approaching the industrial sector with a few specific tools, and I want to highlight them because I think they, for us, are what provide the foundation of how we, I think, accelerate progress even further in the industrial sector. The first, and we've got a persistent bug. Maybe it's a gadfly. The first is getting our arms around what embodied carbon looks like for every single product. Little known fact, the Inflation Reduction Act actually included resources for the Environmental Protection Agency to finance the development of EPDs and proliferate them through the marketplace. So that's thing number one, is we will develop those protocols, and we're putting millions of dollars behind that proposition. The second is that we have designed, I think, the first of its kind facility to help reduce the premium burden of government procurement of clean materials. Multiple billions of dollars now helping us every time we go out and build infrastructure to absorb that premium and pull forward the deployment of these technologies. And in the process, and I think this has to be part of our thesis for the industrial sector, in the process, we're not just defining what's the absolute clean product, but we're actually, through a robust stakeholder process, defining what slightly better, and then better yet, looks like, so that we can build a portfolio of advancement. And I think I share that because I think that's a playbook for private sector actors, for state and local governments, and for national governments around the world, to have a whole approach that cascades through all of what is possible, as opposed to just focus on the tippy top of what we can do. I think all of this needs to get complemented through regulatory regime, standard setting, as well as through trade policy that reflects this ambition. It's so heartening to be at a UN climate conference where there was a trade day, where people are talking about the flow of carbon molecules embedded in materials from one place to the next, and how we level the playing field for clean technology. This is an absolute imperative for the competitiveness of these industries, for our ability to translate the momentum from first movers into the entire marketplace. So that's, I think, my challenge for us and for all of us in this coalition that have moved our ability to imagine from what was possible in Paris, leaving 15% of the emissions on the table, to now having within our sights every ounce of pollution being able to be captured and put into the ground. The way I think we scale up is by proliferating our know-how and our ability to track these emissions, EPDs and other protocols, our ability to underwrite against that, our focus on procuring not just the best stuff, but the better stuff as well, and then building a trade policy that reflects this ambition as well. Because until we do that, I think we create a real barrier to fully scaling up the advantage that can be delivered from these technologies and the risk appetite that leading firms have shown in taking on this work. The president is a big builder. He likes the concreteness of tackling emissions in the industrial sector. It's a big focus for us. And we see also a great deal of political economy attaching to taking on this challenge, because these factories that have been producing dirty materials have also been producing a bunch of other emissions that have been impacting the communities along their fence lines. This is a chance not just to tackle the climate crisis, but to improve lives and livelihoods in the neighborhoods where these factories are situated. So I'm very grateful for Secretary Kerry's, I think, visionary concept in this space, putting down a marker. For the companies that stepped up and continue to push ahead, for the technologists that have helped us now have the tools in hand to imagine a fully net zero future. And for the momentum, I think we'll collectively keep generating to make sure the first movers aren't the last ones that are moving along this path, but in fact, the ones that are pulling everybody along. Very grateful to be here, to have an opportunity to learn from all of you. Thanks so much.